forward to any comments from anybody who looks at the book, and hopefully you guys enjoy it. So I wrote this in considering context of global catastrophe and some of the social fragmentation going on, and how poetry can address these issues, and how specifically Golden Armor sort of within its own cultural context is also addressing the globe as an entity. Okay, so I'll begin now. Thank you so much. My friends, we live in honorary times. As protesters in our country take to the street to combat the cruelty and injustice this administration represents, the poets and artists take to their pens and creative work. Harvard University brought us some of the most important poets over its history, including Henry Wadsworth Longfellow and abolitionist Ralph Waldo Emerson. In recent times, Amanda Gorman and John Ashbery studied here. Emerson offers wisdom about poetry. Quote, "For poetry was all written before time was, and whenever we are so finely organized that we can penetrate into that region where the air is music, we hear those primal warblings and attempt to write them down, but we lose ever and anon a word or a verse, and substitute something of our own, and thus miswrite the poem. The men of more delicate ear write down these cadences more faithfully, and these transcripts, though imperfect, become the songs of the nations." End quote. If poetry is as delicate an expression as Emerson indicates, imagine translation of the poem between languages. This is exactly how Golden Armor was compiled. It began in Albanian and was translated by the poet herself into English. In my introduction to the collection, I state, Golden Armor is a poetry collection about femininity, war, human rights abuses, and social concerns. Armenida offers intriguing perspectives and the clarity of bold language. Most of the poems merge the female persona and her longings with contemporary concerns about global conflict and human initiative. Using a startling array of gentle symbolic images, Golden Armor is a remarkable act in literary citizenship. This description is derived from Armenida's concerns with Kosovo, the struggle for her rights in Iran, and the violence globally that threatens human cultural life. Canadian historian Margaret Macmillan writes, "History does not produce definitive answers for all time. It is a process." In her 2009 book, The Uses and Abuses of History, she writes, "As a judge, history also undermines the claims of leaders to omniscience. Dictators, perhaps because they know their own lies so well, have usually realized the power of history. Consequently, they have tried to rewrite, deny, or destroy the past." End quote. And in America, where this impulse is becoming familiar, poets must pen their witness in order to combat the impersonal constructions that serve the powerful. Poetry can be a vivid and emotional recollection of history as it happens. Carolyn Forshey reminds us, quote, "We are responsible for the quality of our vision. We have a say in the shaping of our sensibility. In the many thousand daily choices we make, we create ourselves and the voice with which we speak and work." End quote. Armenida's poetry is wrought with deep longings, a sense of absence, and the tenderness of love. I recognize the depth of persuasion her poetry offered as I read it. She contacted me last year to publish the volume. With the help of Candace Louisa DeQuinn, the translations were edited carefully. One thing I noted was the frequent use of the word longingness. It appears 7 times in the volume. Longing implies absence and a search for something deeper, whether within oneself or something else. Longingness is a state. And Inside My Heart, Armenida writes, "How many days since our last kiss? How many nights we do not meet in my dreams? This starless sky tells of my longingness. Deep in my heart to keep looking for you." This feeling of absence is conveyed almost metaphysically as the stanza invokes dreams, starless sky, and the heart in a restless quest for the loved one. However, personal love is merely a source to reveal the grief of humanity insistent on destroying itself. In Mercenaries of Chaos, a poem reflecting the COVID era, Armenida writes, "What will you say one day to the empty skulls of your children that won't know anything else other than shaking involuntarily, uncontrollably, tequila, tequila, va, va?" The last line is from a popular song in Albania. What is being addressed here is the collective ignorance of a culture that ignores the emotional impact of historical conditions. Much of popular culture is bombast, ignorance, lewdness, and agitation. According to Newsweek, more than 2/3 of Billboard Top 100 hits featured explicit language in 2017, whereas only 5 songs up until 2001 had explicit language since 1958. Armenida is concerned that the quality of culture passed from generation to generation has declined, is informed by her interest in history. It is unfortunate that poetry readership among adults has declined significantly. According to National Literary Trust, 1 in 4 children, ages 8 to 18, have read poetry for fun at least once a month. There has been a 40% drop in leisure reading over the past two decades among American adults. Reading shows an interest in understanding the world and broadening that understanding. Reading literature specifically initiates conversations with ages past. The personal depth of literary creation makes it distinctly human. For example, Dickens was born into financial hardship and worked in a factory as a child. His novels were often centered on the experience of the poor. Having lived experience that supported his creations, they were imbued with emotion and truth we still recognize today. His novels convinced others of the injustices of Victorian society and led to legislation to combat it. We may have trouble finding popular writers today who are as influential concerning injustice. However, this has not sidelined its importance as a social force. David Foster Wallace stated, quote, "Fiction is one of the few experiences where loneliness can be both confronted and relieved," end quote. The need for love and expressions of love has gained importance as we struggle with a world connected through technology rather than human interaction. As I segue into the choice of sentiment Golden Armor embraces, I also want to remind our audience that the title represents the strength and femininity. Pallas Athena, born from Zeus's head after pounding her way to her release, is artistically conveyed on the front cover by Bruno Eliage, hopefully I got the pronunciation right. Yeah. The mythical representation serves as a key metaphor for female empowerment against alienating structures. A woman's determined stance is often confounded by social forces beyond her control. Armenida captures these repressions in several poems, one being That Killed Massa. The poems open with the male gaze. "You look at me, as always full of pleasure," she writes, and continues, "Well, today I look at you secretly." This poem is in the voice of the Iranian girl Massa, who was killed by repressive Islamic morality police. Massa Amini becomes a symbol of heroic resistance for not wearing the hijab according to government standards, sparking massive protests in Iran. Her death reveals that the institutionalized violence upholding authoritarian theocracy has fissures and cracks. Massa unwillingly became a symbol of resistance as her death invoked global rage. Even though this 22-year-old woman did not intend to shape a movement, her memory lingers over the continued erasure of human rights. Amnesty International released a report on the ongoing protests, which indicates the highest number of repressive killings in decades. Iranian women still invoke her power to empower their struggle against religious impositions by the Islamic regime. Armenida's poem continues this legacy of women's roles in social transformation. The poetry of Golden Armor, in spite of the implications of the title, does not give credence to violence. In fact, the poetry empathizes with victims of violence. In Refugee's life, these lines describe the forlorn feeling of being without a place to call your own. The walls of flesh will feel the red iron, the burning agony of hell while alive. This vivid description of emotional turmoil faced by displaced people recognizes how war and displacement dehumanize refugees. Armenida continues, that's how they have branded cattle for centuries. The shape of alienation on the heart feels like a stamp of failure and grief. Cattle branding is a sharp image on a displaced person whose world rejects the right to home. As we have witnessed over the last few decades, our own foreign policy has created a shift in Middle Eastern countries like Iraq and Syria, where the promise of renewed democracy failed. Western countries now resist intake of refugees out of fear that Islam is not compatible with Western traditions. Right-wing populism surged in recent years as Islamophobia directed the narrative society introduced. However, according to a Pew Research study, only 29% of migrants are Muslim. UNHCR determined most refugees escape from Christian-majority countries. This is a global issue that invokes our human sympathies universally. Displaced people are not the only global citizens struggling within the violence corrupting human society. The opening lines of Kosovo detail a country's grief and identity crisis as violence invades its private spaces. Quote, I know that you shed tears inside your heart, even when you smile. The eyes that tried to hide them in their corners tell me, the wet voice that trembles in the air, end quote. These intimate sensations clearly reveal Armenida's gift for unveiling collective turmoil through the personal voice. Kosovo transforms into a cyclical existence bearing a phoenix-like resurrection. Quote, your returned soul, century after century, doesn't know why it is reborn, drenched in blood again and again to die. The perpetual struggle to live and create is what makes poetry resistant to authority and the hubris of the human condition. Nothing is needed now more than poetry that bears the personal stamp, yet conveys the depth of anguish this fragmenting world is experiencing. I would not describe Armenida's political views as globalist, yet her cosmopolitan balance brings furtive resistance to this rapidly changing environment. We have nothing within us that resists connection to unity and human progress. And bearing the voice of self-reliant and powerful figurations, golden armor is that which resists the false dichotomies, threatening to undo the majesty of independent resolution. Most of the fear we encounter is imaginary. While courage is usually reserved for the great men of history, our stories bear the mark of genuine human connection. What is preserved in poetry, such as that in Golden Armor, is the unique imagination of a gifted visionary, an imagination that unveils the deepest human tragedies, an imagination that recognizes human interconnectedness and need for expressive devotion. Armenida's own unique position as an immigrant from Albania into Canada enlivens her writing with genuine understanding. This book evolves the deeply personal into the patently historic condition of truth. As you listen and read her, this condition will strike you deeply. I invite you to consider what these pages confide. I appreciate your time in listening, and may each of you offer your own symbolic resistance in the need for human truth. Thank you.